Hello, my name is Carrol Pettersen, nee Gray. I'm here in Albany in Western Australia, and what we're looking at here is a map of the old walk trails that the old Aboriginal people walked through many years ago. And all this, we can get this in coloured later on, but this is a black and white one, and these dark lines are the traditional walk trails. Now these tiny lines are the existing highway. This is Albany Highway. This one is the South Coast Highway that goes from Albany to Jerramunga and on. Now you note two things. One is that's up near Wave Rock area, very significant spot, and the walk trails follow water lines. Now even though these are still salt lakes, there was fresh water that the old Aboriginal people, and even today, we still know where some of those fresh waters are. You can see them following the lakes down, following the rivers. And it's interesting to watch, even from here, which is down near Walpole, you can see the walk trails linking interregional right up to Wave Rock. So the people actually walked those far. Look at this one here that goes right up, way up to 2J, to Perth. So it was linking. You're linking from here right across to Ravensthorpe. So the people had these walk trails where there were trading taking places, tribal ceremonies, but there was this interlinking of walk trails for the regional areas. And people didn't walk on private land. This is all private, different tribal groups. They had to stay strictly on the walk trails. And when they talk about walk trails, you're also talking about storylines, we're talking about song lines. And as people walked the trails, they would sing the next place. So there would be a singing here, and they'd sing for the next place. And this is a repetitious way of teaching people how they kept. That the only signs posts were the singing and the physical features of the landscape and the flora. As I said before, we had our territorial tree was a Tallarat tree, and when that tree was no longer available to us, we knew we were out of our district and we'd have to move back. So the tree that we took care of us and showed us our tribal boundaries is mainly along the coast. If we could no longer see it, it meant we were outside of our territory.
Who made this map?
Oh, sorry, this was Noel Nannup. He worked with the then department called Conservation and Land Management, but he actually got the knowledge of the old people. So he went around and he spoke to everybody and said, where was your walk trail? However, what's not on this map, and which I'm working on and want to tell the story, is my walk trails. And there's two that I remember, three. One is from Albany, right away around to Esperance, and I'm working on getting that done. I've done a report on it, I just need to get it onto the maps. The other one is a storyline that goes from the Stirling Ranges, and it talks about the landscape and the creation of the landscape, and the story runs along there that I know as far as here. And the third story that I wanted to be able to tell, or the walk trail, is one that went from Noangarup down to Borden and across to Jerramunga. Now it could have linked up with that trail, but I remember it followed a water line because there was rivers here that we call Nightwell, and the water only came up at night, so it must have been pushed up by the tides. So there must be another river that runs through here somewhere. And I remember as a child travelling that walk trail through there, and we call it the Kumaldornup Trail. So there's a lot more, so that's some that I know of. There may be some other, when we look at the vast ranges here there could be interlinking trails there. You know, why are these... The reason these towns were set up was because the Aboriginal people back in those days knew where the water were. So there would have been something significant. That's in a straight line there.
You were telling me something about the telegraph line before as well.
Okay, when I talked about my walk trail here, the only way I could identify it was to understand how did the old telegraph line come to be. And I found out that when Edward John Eyre, in the late 1800s, he was commissioned by the West Australian and South Australian government to look for a route to establish the overland telegraph line. Now, he took with him an Aboriginal man from Albany called Wiley. And it is my assumption that he took Wiley because Wiley would know where the waters were. And so what I did was tracked the telegraph line, looked at old diaries, maps and everything, and I found that the telegraph line followed a storyline of mine with my family. I've got maps that show where the water holes that are now familiar with us today, where the crossings were. We remember as children those crossings. And so it's very coincidental that and I assume that the telegraph line followed the old walk trail, because again, you couldn't walk off onto private land, and Wiley would have known that. So he took Edward John Eyre, who then mapped the overland telegraph line along the old original walk trail.
It's an incredible amount of knowledge that is not recorded, not evident. You know, looking out here.
In a global perspective like that, I suppose, you got snippets of stories, yeah, but it's not captured in a global...
So these stories, as I'm starting to kind of get an understanding of it, were used to navigate through the landscape. That's why these existed. Yeah. These aren't stories just because they're stories. This is if you don't know the story, you can't get there.
Yeah.
You can't get to the next place unless you know the story.
Yeah.
And because there is no paper, of course.
And because they put it in songs, they put it into songs so that people could remember it. And, you know, you're walking along and you're singing.
That's what being human's about.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it was repetitious. You know, you might say the same thing over and over. You know, coming up to, say, Turbanup was a place, or coming up to Walganup, you know, the hills of those two boys, Walganup. You know, we're singing about Walganup, the boy got killed and all that, so you'll know suddenly there it is, you know, there.
That's amazing. Makes me just think of, you know, out here, looking out to the bay here. When you think about, say, the last ice age, for example, and the people, they were here, and the sea level was so much lower, there would have been a stream running through there. You know,
there's an ancient one going through, I think, through Oyster Harbour, but I know of a story, again, a story of the creation of this harbour.
Really?
And there was no water.
Really?
Yeah. The creation of the harbour, yeah. And I actually met a lady, she might have been an anthropologist or something, and she said to me, I'm looking for somebody, do you know of anybody that could tell me a story of when there was no water around? I said, I can. And she was just absolutely flabbergasted, you know. And so it ties in with the theory that the land was down here near the, you know, the continental shelf.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there was nothing, this was just flat land, and there was two brothers, you know, or there's these mythical ones, they morph into mythical and beings of human and animal 1 minute, you know, so the two islands were just there were two snakes, and they were brothers, and they were caretakers of the land. And so the older brother, which is Michaelmas Island, Michaelmas, I think is the one to the left, he used to try and teach the younger one how to look after the land. Right, and so what they had to do was to go out and make sure the water holes were clean, the water was running fresh, the birds were using it just to see everything like that, and they had to make sure that the environment was happy, because the spirits of the land were happy. But the little brother didn't want to work, he wanted to play all the time, and the older brother got annoyed with him, and anyway, and he used to give him the food. So you can only harvest the food if you've sort of taken care of the country. Anyway, so the time came one day when he said, I'm not going to feed you anymore, he said to the younger brother. You've got to go out and you've got to look after the land, you've got to go and get your own food. The little brother continued playing. And so the older brother one day he curled up and he went to sleep, and he made sure he curled up as a snake curled up, and he had the eggs, supply of eggs in there, so the younger brother wouldn't pinch them. But the younger brother crept up to him and managed to steal these eggs. Just as he did that, the older brother woke up and caught him with the egg, because by this time he'd gotten them halfway down his throat. And so a big fight ensued. And as you can imagine, when snakes are fighting, they're rolling round and round and round. And as they rolled round and round, they created the hills, as we can see now. See the hills? As they pushed the dirt back, they came. And the old Aboriginal people, when a fight occurred, it was maybe over an hour. But this fight went on for days and days, and the old people were really, really worried about it. And because it was about food, they thought, well, they threw one of the camp dogs to them. But in the fight, the dog was bitten in half, and that's the head now that's Dog Rock. That's the head there, and his tail is just down the street a little bit. But these two still kept fighting. They weren't interested in that. And eventually this is it here. They got to Oyster Harbour. In Oyster Harbour there, there's, that's Princess Royal. This is where they created this here, right around, and then they got into Oyster Harbour, and there's a little island there. So eventually the older brother overtook the younger brother and got him to spit out the eggs. And so they buried the eggs there, which is now called Green Island. And today we see it's a rookery, and we believe that the birds are going back looking for their eggs. Now, the younger brother was absolutely exhausted, and he couldn't last any longer. So he crawled away, and he crawled up, and he created what we call the King River. There's the King River there. And he died there, right? And that's the airport somewhere there. But there's an ochre site there, which is his blood as he died. So that's the younger brother created that. The older brother was just as wounded, and he crawled away, and he went up what we call the Calgon River, which goes about 200 k's up. And up in Cranbrook there's a huge ochre site where he died. And so that's it. But when that happened, all the water flowed in and created Princess Royal Harbour. Wow. Now I've got photos of that ochre site there. Now what we talked about a moment ago was all the different walk trails. We talked about the walk trail that went from the Stirling Ranges, and that'll be on another story on its own, and it talks about the two boys that ran away and were killed, and their uncles were laying there waiting for them. We talked a moment ago about the Ngudju Trail that followed the telegraph, or the telegraph line followed the Ngudju Trail there, and we've got to build this in. We also talked about another story that went from Noangrup through the Jerramungup, and it followed the water line, and it became a valuable source for settlers with their sheep, because a lot of Noongar people then did shepherding of sheep, and they were able to follow the water. But all of this provides a background to the story that I want to talk about the Stirling Ranges, about the Ngudju Trail, and it just shows the landscape that our old Aboriginal people were able to walk, and they navigated this through the physical layout of the lands, like the story of the Stirling Range. That was to help us to navigate where we were. The trees, the Talyarak trees, helped us to navigate our territory. And so people knew where this other... And there were physical features to the Aboriginal people themselves too. We knew who came from the Jerramungup way. we knew who came from there because of their dialect and their actual physical features. We were able to tell where people came from. So this provides a background to the walk trails and where people live. Here you can see this is a lot of connections there. Julkani, that must have been very, very important for these walk trails to come out. Wave Rock, it looks like only one, and it was a thoroughfare for the others. Again, another one is Jerramunga. That's you can see there's 3 different tribes coming out of there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 6 tribes met there, and that would have been a very important spot. But again, water was the critical attraction to a lot of these places. Okay.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.